Good morning and welcome to another edition of Carpod Church. As the sun breaks through the cloudy sky and casts beautiful shimmering light upon us this morning, and the sea is calm and the day is just beginning, and we're continuing our reflections on the story of Ruth and also what it means to be church in a very different time. And today we're looking at the traditions, the ancient traditions that are part of our background spiritually, but we're also looking at probably a difficult part of Ruth's story, because we're talking about customs and traditions that are thousands of years old and are very much not part or should not be part of who we are today. But back in those days, as I've said before, the value of a woman was determined by her father, her husband, or her sons. And not only that, it was attached to property. And so in many ways, the value of a woman was set in terms of what she had to offer. Now, Ruth was a Moabitess. She was a stranger in the land. She was back in Bethlehem with Naomi. Naomi had some land in the name of her husband. And Naomi and Boaz really had come to an understanding, as we saw last week, that Ruth was available to be married. I think Naomi had picked up on this connection between the two of them and realized that Boaz actually loved Ruth, which wouldn't have been common necessarily in marriage in those days. So when Ruth approaches Boaz and he tells her that he has to make arrangements for them to be together, what he meant was that there was another person who could be a family redeemer. So the way this worked was somebody who was related to Elimelech could claim Naomi's land, and in claiming Naomi's land could claim Ruth as well as his wife. Doesn't sound very romantic. But Boaz knows this, and he knows that he has to work through the system. So what he actually does is he sits at the gate in the very early hours of the morning, the gate of the city, of the town of Bethlehem. And what would happen is the leaders of the town, the men of the town, would have gathered in the morning, and they would have done their business at the gateway of the city. And he waits, and just after he arrives, this other family redeemer, this relative of Elimelech's, turns up. So Boaz says, "I would like to talk with you." And he gets 10 witnesses, 10 other men to join him in this discussion. Now, I think the requirement was actually only 7. So such is his enthusiasm and his determination to get this right, that he actually goes that extra bit further and gets 10 witnesses. And he sits down with Elimelech's relation and he said, "Look, Naomi, who has returned to us, has a field, she has property, and you're entitled to redeem that field." And the relative is delighted. "This is great. What's not to like? I can get a good bit of land. I know this piece of land, and I can redeem my relative's family as well." And he says, "Of course, I'll redeem it." And I can almost imagine Naomi and Ruth hidden in the background, listening in on this, and almost Ruth being upset because she thinks, "Oh no, this is actually going against us. This is actually going to go wrong." But Boaz is a very wise man. And he knows that there are subtleties to this story that need to be played out. And so he says, "Now, not only do you get the land, but you also get Ruth. You actually get the Moabitess." And this causes a problem for Elimelech's relative, because if she comes into his family and has sons, then they're entitled to some of his land, never mind her land. And it's a very complicated and subtle approach that Boaz is taking. And so he said, "Well, look, then I can't redeem it. And you redeem it. You're next in line after me. I'm happy for you to redeem the land, and if you want to, you can take Ruth as your wife." As I say, these are not pleasant ways of dealing with things nowadays, but in those days this was how it was done. And then the tradition happens. And what we have here today is another sandal. It's a more like ancient looking one because it's been all over the world and walked on many beaches, but it is a sandal. And you might think, well, why is the sandal such an important part of this story? Because there was a tradition in those days that when you were making an arrangement, a legal contract with somebody else, what you did was you took off your sandal and you gave it to them. It meant literally you couldn't run away. It meant literally that you had to honour the arrangement that had been made. Obviously, they got the sandal back in due time, of course, and that was all fine. But it was a very important symbol of surrender of your rights. So this relative of Elimelech gives to Boaz his sandal, and Boaz says to the witnesses, now you've seen this, you've witnessed this, I am going to claim this land, and I'm going to claim Ruth from Moab as my wife. And they all agree that this is the way it is, and this is the way it should be. Now, what on earth does that say to us today? Obviously, we live in very different times, but it's actually, in some ways, a lesson in where our hearts are set. If our hearts are set on our possessions, on our reputation, on our sense of value is brought from what we have rather than who we are, then we are subject to making mistakes. Really, our hearts aren't focused in the right place. Of course, we need money, we need finance, we need to live, we need to provide for our families, we need to do all of these things. But our hearts can't be fixed there, because if they are, we end up living lives that are not really the fullest of what we can be. And Boaz loves Ruth, and we're going to talk about that next week in our final study of Ruth. Boaz loves her. He's willing to go through these traditions to have her for his wife. They love each other. But his heart is set on love, not on what he can gain from it. And I think therein lies the lesson for us at this time. It is so easy to get distracted by the things of this world, when actually really what matters most is our health and our faith. And we really surrender that to God today, to the glory of his name. Thank you.